Hi there. Welcome to another edition of the Israel-Palestine Report. Today we're going to talk about the complete collapse in support for the Israeli operation in Gaza, and long term, it looks like for Israel itself. I mean, the voices that today have come out against what's happening in Gaza are really quite remarkable. Let's take a look at some of the statements that have come out today that surprised even me, even though I was seeing the tide turn for quite a while. So probably the most important one comes from the ADL, because the ADL has been pretty much lockstep in supporting Israel throughout this entire conflict, downplaying the genocide, downplaying the starvation, and they just released a statement. Here it is verbatim. We have significant reservations about the Israeli cabinet's decision to expand operations in Gaza. We're in no position to speak to the military strategy around this decision, but are concerned it could further endanger the 50 hostages brutally held by Hamas for 672 days in unimaginable conditions, while also worsening conditions for Gazan civilians. Since Hamas' October 7th terrorist attack on Israel, Jewish communities around the world have faced a tsunami of harassment, vandalism, and violence. Time and time again, despicable, hateful acts of anti-Semitism have been committed under the false pretext of protesting the war in Gaza. As the situation on the ground develops, we reiterate holding all Jews accountable for policies and decisions by the Israeli government is anti-Semitism. So, what we have here is very interesting. Um, of course, the main reason they oppose what Israel's doing now, the escalation in Gaza, is the hostages, as they said. But they're also doing something else. They're distancing themselves from Israeli policy. The ADL is saying, don't hold Jews responsible for the mistakes of Israel, something that a lot of supporters of Israel have been saying for a long time. And that is a complete pivot. They realize they can no longer defend what Israel's doing, and instead are moving somewhat. I think we're going to see this with increasing stridency towards defending Jews from the fallout of the actions of the Israeli government. Another statement that really surprised me was the one from Adam Schiff. It came out 2 hours ago. He said Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's plan to occupy Gaza in a military operation that the Israeli military itself opposes, and we'll talk more about that in a second, and that could extend for years, will only result in further loss of life among the hostages, Palestinian civilians, and members of the IDF required to undertake such a calamitous task. The situation in Gaza is unendurable. This will make it worse. This war must end, not escalate. Then he continues, already Palestinians are starving, including substantial numbers of women and children, even as Hamas terrorists starve and murder Israeli hostages. So here again, we see criticism of Netanyahu's policy framed in a kind of pro-Israel framework of we're looking out for the hostages, we're looking out for the IDF, casting Netanyahu as the problem. Of course, with while continuing to blame Hamas for it as well. But probably the most important headline today in terms of the reaction to the Israeli escalation in Gaza has to be the German government, which of course has had a kind of ironclad commitment to Israeli security over the years, and now has announced that it's stopping the shipment of all arms that could be used in Gaza. Now, that's important for two reasons. Reason number one, the only way that Israel can be influenced to stop this operation is if there are arms embargoes. That hits Israel where it hurts, and also will turn the Israeli public against Netanyahu further. And of course, while the main supplier of arms for Israel is the United States, Germany is definitely second, not a close second, but second in its importance, especially in the provision of parts to the IDF. So this is actually going to hurt operationally, and after Slovenia did the same thing, other countries will likely do the same thing. The United States, unfortunately, is probably not going to do that. Of course, J Street came out with a similar statement. That's less of a surprise. The escalation will cost more civilian lives, trigger mass displacement, deepen the humanitarian crisis, and isolate Israel. And every single former head of an Israeli security service signed a letter uh, calling not to escalate the war, calling not to occupy Gaza, not to start this new operation. Other traditional supporters of Israel, um, like Chuck Schumer, for example, have come out against it and want the war to end. The European Union is something to watch very closely. They're discussing further sanctions against Israel on research funding programs. Some want to suspend the trade deal. Germany is one of the leading voices that was against that. There are others. Czech Republic, Poland, Hungary. So all this is worth keeping an eye on. The EU is Israel's main trade partner, much larger than the United States, and a trade embargo on Israel from the EU would cripple its economy. We're nowhere near that yet, but these steps are bringing us closer. So we're seeing two things. We're seeing an increase of Israel's isolation worldwide, but maybe more importantly, we're seeing Israel's supporters triangulate and start to move away from supporting Netanyahu, which they increasingly realize is a losing battle, to saying, we support hostages, we support not putting IDF soldiers at risk. Basically, the same position as the majority of the Israeli population, the people who have been protesting against the government for a long time. This is something that a lot of activists have been calling for quite a while, including my friend Luke Bernard, for the Jewish organizations and pro-Israeli organizations to stop embracing Netanyahu, who's putting Israel in danger, and embrace this kind of position instead. It's not enough because what's happening in Gaza is a genocide and should be labeled as such, but it's a very worrying sign from Netanyahu's perspective. He's increasingly left with the support of Trump and those kind of people, with almost none of Israel's traditional liberal supporters in his corner. And in a world where the vast majority of the world is already um, against Israel, that means the isolation reaches unbearable proportions. And this is part of an erosion of support among American Jews that is sizable and significant, and is coupled with what we saw with the Democratic Party, where more than half of the senators voted to block arms sales to Israel. This is a massive shift, and it seems to me to be irreversible. And if this operation continues, which it likely will, it's only going to get more severe. A major blow for Israel, a major move towards ending the genocide. I don't know how sustainable this operation can be under those circumstances. If you like what I do here, consider supporting me on Patreon, Shale Media, reading my Substack, The Grand Scheme, and listening to my History of the Land of Israel podcast.